Welcome back to ChatChit. This is the round 21 wrap-up of the AFL season, and this was easily the best round of footy we've seen this year. There were 5 games this week where either team could have won until the final 30 seconds. Huge comebacks in those games. And then outside of the close games, the Swans versus Power game, which we'll get into in depth, was the most shocking and unexpected result of the year. Here is a stat for you. The biggest loss in a premiership year, so for a team that went on to win the flag that year, was a 100-point loss for Carlton in 1945. This Swans 112-point loss means that they have a chance to break that record. So we're going to start off the video with a positive that I can find out of that Swans performance. But let's get in to...
That's not promising, but let's move on to the top 5 players of the round.
We don't do honourable mentions anymore, Aiden, but I have one this week. I just had to do it. My honourable mention is Aaron Francis, but as a Port Adelaide player. I think the amount that he did for Port Adelaide this week in the Port forward 50 was huge and really led that charge that they made.
Look, I'm not going to lie, you could put a bunch more on that list who probably were playing for Port on that day.
But I'll give you my actual number 5, which was Hayden Young. There were so many standout performances this week. People who, I think there'll be a lot of 10 coaches votes this week. Guys that just really dominated and were clear best players on ground. But I wanted to squeeze in Hayden Young. He was amazing. His goal out of the centre was, for me, the highlight of the round.
Really?
There were a lot of big highlights this round.
I was going to say.
But I loved that. I just love moments like that. And he was awesome. And he just continues to play well this year.
My number 5, and I felt like it was a real team performance from Port. They just absolutely monstered the Swans, and we'll jump into that a bit later. But I just want to highlight one guy, and that's Jason Horne-Francis. And I feel like he's a bit on and off this season. When he's on, he's really on. He had 27 touches, a goal, 12 score involvements, went at 62%, which is fine for the position that he plays in. Had an awesome game, and hopefully he can keep up the form.
Yeah, he was great. At number 4, I've got Jeremy Cameron, who has been doing a lot for Geelong this year without necessarily having huge goal-scoring hauls. But this game, he kicked 6 and was huge and instrumental in Geelong sneaking a win against Adelaide, where they were down with 10 minutes to go.
I like it. My number 4 was Adam Treloar. And maybe you might think he should be higher, but then again, the Melbourne midfield didn't offer a whole lot, so I felt like it was quite easy to rack up the stats. But then again, you got to beat what's in front of you. 2 goals, 30, 11 score involvements at 76%.
Yeah, I felt sick to my stomach that I didn't put Treloar in. I kicked him out because after the Hayden Young performance,
this was
I wanted to put him in.
Top 5 to make. There are about 6 or 7 names, maybe potentially more, that could have easily been in the top 5.
Yeah, so many impressive performances. At number 3, I've got Darcy Moore. Now, when I read you his stat line as a key defender, 11 disposals, 2 marks.
Doesn't sound too good.
Doesn't sound too good, but he kept the best forward in the league, and by far the best forward in the league.
I think he was on a 66 or 67, something around there, at least 1+ goal a game streak.
Yeah, which is incredible. And Darcy Moore kept him goalless, played a selfless role. And Darcy Moore, while we know he's one of the most talented defenders in the league, cops a lot of criticism that he's not disciplined. Goes off his man, tries to make plays, get intercept marks a bit too much, and his man scores a lot of goals. He played a selfless role on Charlie Curnow, which was amazing, and I thought he was the most influential player to that Collingwood win.
I like it. He was due a big performance, was Darcy Moore. He's had a down year compared to how he was last year. My number 3 is someone you've already mentioned in Jeremy Cameron. I'll just say he put the team on his back in that game.
Yep.
They needed a win. They needed to get it however possible, and he kicked 6 goals and was best on ground by an absolute mile.
Yeah. At number 2, I've got LDU. It rhymes, so it must be right. 3 goals and just an absolute force. He is the Rolls Royce. 3 goals and 3 goal assists with 8 clearances is not a bad day out. And we continue to see some really exciting flashes from North. Yes, it was against Richmond, but Luke Davies-Uniacke, along with Harry Sheezel, are the future of North Melbourne.
I like it. I'm just going to say now, I don't have LDU in my thing, and I've got a little note that I've written here. Against Richmond, I don't like to appreciate players that play against the bottom side. I did get with Nick Dacos last week. I put him as the 5th best player of the round, but he got an absolutely
It was ridiculous.
Then again, LDU, he's never kicked 3 goals in his career, so it works both ways, I guess. My number 2 is someone you won't have. It's Jesse Hogan.
Yeah.
Hawthorn have an absolutely awesome defence. I think best defence in the last 6 weeks. I think I read somewhere. Up there with the Dogs for 1st and 2nd. They have a really good system defence. They run it really well. Frost, Sicily, Weddle, Scrimshaw, all really good at the back. He absolutely smashed them. As in, taking the contested marks that he did in the pressure times, kicking goals.
Yep, the fourth quarter.
Kicking goals under pressure. Had a massive fourth quarter. 5 goals at the end when it was only 2 points, came up the ground, take a really big contested mark just to completely kill the game. And he's now the Coleman leader. He's going to be an All-Australian. And we thought it couldn't get much better after his last year, based on what he's done in his career, except it's got a lot better.
Yep.
And I think we haven't mentioned him a whole lot in this podcast, but he's getting up there for the best forward in the league.
Fair enough. Now, my number one, and he's going to be your number one as well. You jumped the gun a bit last week, I thought, putting Marcus Bontempelli as the number one player in the league in your pyramid.
Backed it up.
He backed it up. He proved you right this week. what a performance. And the fact that he just got it done and sorted out the game, put Melbourne away in the first half. It was insane. 16 score involvements with 2 goals and 33, with a couple of goal assists to go along with it. But he was just smooth, got a lot of the ball, was dominant in the air and on the ground, was tackling and putting effort in. It was the performance of a best player in the league and a guy who probably should have a couple of Brownlow medals by now. And who knows, maybe he's making a late charge to get one this year.
I like it. Now, I normally have a few notes for some players, but what I've written here is 2 goals, 33, 16 score involvements, 2 assists, 3 votes. Thanks for coming. Let's jump into hits and misses.
My hit was how we started the pod, which was just what a round this was. So let's jump straight to Aiden's hit.
Yeah, my hit is just about the intensity of several games remaining. We're seeing so many elimination style final type games this year. Games for the top 4. The top spot is opening up now. Giants versus Hawthorn, for example. The Giants lost, would be 8th. Win took them top 4. Port could have been out of the top 8. Instead, they're top 4. Carlton, who were flag favourite a month ago, pretty much are playing for finals versus Hawthorn next week. I mean, what more can we want from this season?
It's great. It's great.
I mean, there are so many games you can earmark. Swans Collingwood, for example, on Friday night. Collingwood have jumped back in it. They've put out an awesome performance against Carlton.
Just a pressure performance.
Hawthorn need to beat Carlton to have a chance at finals. Carlton need to win to keep themselves in the top 8. I mean, did we think we were going to say that? Essendon, coming from nowhere, we thought they were done for the season. Now we're in with a shout to make top 8. I'm not really sure what we're seeing here, but
it's
there
special.
are so many teams that are still in it, so many important games. I'm absolutely loving it. What's your miss?
My miss is about one of those teams. It's Carlton, whose season is hanging very precariously. So as you mentioned, not long ago, they were second on the ladder and discussed by all and ourselves as the clear second best team in the comp. And now they're looking at a must-win match pretty much against an in-form Hawthorn side next week, and their season lies in the balance. In 8th place. At the start of the year, Carlton won a lot of games by under 2 goals, and this was talked about that it was like Collingwood in their premiership year. But these are games that could have gone either way, and looking back now, like with hindsight, their spot near the top of the ladder may have been deceiving us. I have another stat for you. When Carlton were sitting in second place at the end of round 15, so not that long ago, they were 15th for points against, only ahead of West Coast, Richmond and North Melbourne. So their defence was not holding up too well, and the signs have been there that their game is not completely in order. It would be devastating if they didn't make finals this year, and the backlash would be huge.
I like it. Now, we're always going to support our Swans. You've got to have the lows to have the highs. Sometimes you've got to have the real lows to maybe have the real highs at the end of the season. But yeah, my miss is the Swans. Where do they go from here? Now, you're going to find out in our next segment when we talk about our top 4 flag favourites. So my 4th favourite for the flag is the Sydney Swans. Now, I know they've had an awful last few weeks, beating only North in the last 5 games. But really, I still back them to finish first or second and get those 2 finals at the SCG. And with Papley, who's supposed to come back before finals, and by the way was the second best player in the competition for the 6 weeks
before he got injured.
Rampy, who
is clearly the most important player in our back line.
Incredibly important. Melican's supposed to come back. Not long-term injuries, but guys that are really important for the side. And I just think they'll be able to come together. And I can't see us being out of the top 4 flag favourites. So I just had to have them in there.
I can't see Longmire smiling until we maybe make a prelim final from here.
It's going to be a tough week to be a Swans athlete in a training camp.
Yeah.
My 3rd favourite is GWS. You were always really hot on them the entire season. I sort of flip-flopped. They had a really hot start, rough middle, and are coming home really, really fast and looking like they're going to finish in the top 4. So yeah, my 3rd favourite. 2nd, I've got the Bulldogs, who are going to really want that top 4 spot. They're going to want to avoid doing what they had to do in 2016 to win the Premiership from outside the top four. But they're playing some of the best footy I've seen from them in quite a few years. Arguably better than what they did in 2016. Their forward line is clicking with the three talls. Their back line with Rory Lobb back there is awesome. Tim English has found some form, and then we don't even want to get started on their midfield.
Yep.
Bont, Treloar,
Yep.
probably the best duo midfield in the comp at the moment. And my number one, it's pretty easy, but it's the Brisbane Lions. They're showing the form at the right time. Won 9 from the last 10. Wouldn't be surprised if they win the next 3 against GWS, Collingwood, and Essendon.
I really like the list because mine is almost the exact same. The only switch is I've got GWS at 4 and Sydney at 3. As much as I've been hotter than you on GWS, had them as my Premiership favourite at the start of the year, I think Sydney have shown us, to win a Premiership, you've got to be the very best. Sydney have shown us that they have the capacity to be that step ahead of everyone else. I'm a Swans fan. I'm a very optimistic person, but I know there's a chance they don't find it from here. They crash out in straight sets. It could easily happen. But I think to find that extra gear, Sydney have that extra gear if they need it. Just speaking about the Bulldogs briefly in number 2, over the last few years, they've been on the precipice of the 8 every year with that dominant midfield, but not enough in their forward line and back line, especially in the key position areas. But they now have, as you talk about, that dominance in both those areas, Jones and Lobb at the back, and then Ugelhagen, Darcy, Norton, all playing really, really solid roles in the forward line, not needing to be near the top goal scorers in the league, in the top 5 there, but just all playing their role, and their team looks really balanced.
I like it. Let's move into the Footy Pyramid. There was one guy who led the Footy Pyramid for a very, very long period of time. There was one point I thought it would be impossible for him to ever exit the pyramid, let alone just even leave top spot, actually. Isaac Heaney is out of the pyramid. He was in the 4th tier last week. I've got a stat. In the last 6 weeks, he's been the 156th best player in the competition.
That's not top 15, is it?
It's not top 15. And he was in the top. He was number 1 for a considerable amount of time. I think it was 10 to 12 weeks of the competition. But the drop of form has aligned with the Swans' drop of form, and he hasn't really found it in the past few weeks. He's out of the pyramid, which means we have a new in. It's someone I mentioned earlier, Jesse Hogan.
Yeah, I love that.
Is in the pyramid. He's the Coleman leader. He's an All-Australian lock at the moment, having his best season of his career, and definitely deserves to be top 15. In the 5th tier alongside him, keeping their places, Tom Green, Zach Butters, Charlie Kono. I know he didn't kick a goal, but still he's up there in the Coleman medal, and he's still an awesome forward. And Harris Andrews holds his spot. In the 4th tier, Caleb Sarong holds his spot. Harry Sheasel holds his spot. Moving up, it could have been anyone between Tom Green, Zach Butters, and Zach Merritt, who moved up. And Errol Goulden moves down. Probably the only one who can potentially hold his head a little bit higher in that game, but he still moves down a tier. And the man that's moving up to take his spot is Adam Treloar, who's now in the 3rd tier, having an awesome last 6 weeks, awesome season. All Australian lock, probably a starter from what we've talked about before. Nick Dacos joins him in the 3rd tier, and Sicily holds a spot in the 3rd tier. There's no changes at the top. 2nd tier is Lockie Neal looking for another 3 votes in the game. Patrick Cripps had a decent game, and Marcus Bontempelli had one of the best games of the year.
Absolutely love it. Let's get into the power rankings. So Richmond stay in 18th on the power rankings, and then next up we have North Melbourne, who drop a spot because of West Coast's performance this week. They got a big win.
It's not a guaranteed win at home against Gold Coast.
Okay, yeah, it was guaranteed. How much
credit are we going to give them here for that win?
Yeah, okay, but so maybe North should feel a little bit robbed to go down a spot here.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Because it was a default win. Next up is Adelaide, who have been putting together some nice performances and had a very valiant effort against Geelong this week.
I really thought they were going to come home and win that game.
Yep. However, it's a little bit too late this season. Adelaide had high hopes for the year, and it's been a very disappointing one. Maybe the only fan base that would be even more disappointed are the Gold Coast fans, because they have not had any enjoyment.
It's a good thing there's not a lot of them.
Okay, very good, very good. And so Gold Coast sit in 14th when...
It's been a rough week to be a Swans fan. They can cop it as well.
Yeah, these were both sides that were really hoping to jump into the 8 this year. Next up is St Kilda, who sit in 13th on the power rankings, who just got shellacked.
After showing some good signs in the previous few weeks before that.
Yep, got shellacked, and they keep their spot in 13. Moving down a couple of spots is Melbourne. Now, the teams around them that were just sitting sort of outside the 8, they sort of all won this week, which has culminated in the ladder becoming even closer from the whole way down to 13th or 12th, as you spoke about earlier. So Melbourne dropped down because they could not get that win. Bulldogs absolutely ripped them apart in the first half and then just cruised to the win.
Yeah.
Essendon sit in 11th. And this was a huge win for them. They go up one spot, but they may have deserved to go even higher, but it's just so contested in there that 11th is sort of where they sit. Just so tight between all teams, though. Next up is Collingwood, who keep their finals hopes alive. They move up a spot as well.
Going to have to beat Sydney at the SCG on Friday night, which is looking very possible the way the Swans are playing at the moment.
I haven't looked at the odds yet, but I assume Collingwood will be a decent favourite. Or maybe the odds will see the Swans bouncing back.
I think they'll still have the Swans as favourites.
Yeah, I just would not want to be anywhere near John Longmire in the next 7 days.
Yeah.
But Collingwood, they might come up against a very angry Swans side. Who knows? This might be the worst week to play the Swans, or the best. We'll have to see. Next up is Carlton in 9th, who they sit in 8th on the ladder, but with their current form, they're a bit below that. So they're going to have to turn around their form if they want to hold on to a final spot. Which,
alongside the Swans, I'll just butt in quickly, have only beaten North Melbourne in the last 5 games.
That's really interesting. I actually did not know that stat. And see, no one would have thought that Carlton would be sitting somewhere like here, just as likely to miss the 8 as they are to make it at this point in the year. Everyone talks about them as the only real lock outside of the Swans. So next up is Geelong, who sit in the top 4 or 5, depending on the result in the Brisbane game. They sit in 5th now, but they are just not quite having the same form, consistent form as some of the teams I'm about to put above them. That includes Port Adelaide, who just jump a couple spots with a humongous performance against Sydney. How much to attribute to Port and how much to attribute to Sydney, we have to pay them credit.
100%. You don't just do that because a team plays badly. You have to absolutely smash them in every area of the game.
Yeah, and they did just that.
71-0. We haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah.
Port were up 71-0, and I saw comments on Instagram. There were people who genuinely were refreshing the AFL app because they thought it was a glitch. I saw several people comment that. They weren't sure about it.
I was at a 21st last night, and I've never been more grateful to not be able to watch a Swans game. First game I haven't been able to watch this year, but I checked the score. It was 45-0, and I physically dropped my phone. Tingle went down my spine, and then I checked again later. It was 71-0. Felt sick to my stomach.
71-0. First by about 4 games, or 3 games in percentage a few weeks ago. Monstered by 100 points and we're down 71-0.
It's so much more sickening when your expectations have been lifted so much by how well they played earlier in the year. And you're like, we know that we can play this way, but it's been a while since we've seen it.
There's now only 3 games left, and based off, I think it was the last 15 Premiership winners, talking about the Premiership runway last week, I think 13 out of 15 of them have won their last 4 games.
Yep.
So all odds are stacked against the Swans at the moment.
And I apologise to any Port fans that this has been framed around a Swans loss rather than a Port win, but it's what's going to happen. Look at the man's scarf and jersey.
Still want to support the boys.
Next up is Fremantle, who now drop out of the 8, but have been playing well, but it's to hold on to a top 4 spot, they're going to need to take away those tight games and close them out. Essendon made that huge comeback at the end. Crowd roaring, like as you were talking about. The crowd was just so loud.
So loud. Mary out of the centre.
Yeah.
Durham, and you'd think he would have flushed it straight through the big sticks, kicked it behind. It was good enough.
Seriously, the chills going down my spine as a fan that is not from Melbourne or Western Australia. I can only imagine. Just showed really, the end of that game showed what a healthy spot the AFL is in. It was, the atmosphere was incredible.
Playing for their lives in the season.
Seriously. Next up is Sydney in 5th.
Dropping 3 spots.
And, okay, so we talked about the top 4 finals contenders, and so the other 3 will sit in top 3. The reason I have Swans in 5th is because I have Hawthorn in 4th. The reason the Swans are a bigger Premiership contender is because of Hawthorn's start to the year and how much they have to fight to make the 8.
Yeah.
They're not going to get a double chance. They're going to have to fight to be there in finals.
They'll be really happy if they can get in the top 8.
But if Hawthorn get there, gosh, are they dangerous. They've been one of the best 3 or 4 teams since that 0-5 start. They have not really had a bad game since that 0-5 start. This loss was just a really strong performance where GWS at home got it done. So
Down by 28 points at three-quarter time. Needed a massive performance to win that game.
So if Hawthorn can make finals, you do not want to play them as a team sitting 5th to 8th. Next up, GWS, who we just spoke about. And then in 1 and 2 is Brisbane and the Bulldogs. I think this is quite clear that these 3 teams are timing their runs beautifully.
Have we ever had a season where we have 2 clear Premiership favourites a month later coming towards the end of the season? They're nowhere.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's been difficult to find a consistent Premiership contender over the last few years because teams like Sydney and Geelong that made the grand final in 2022 both were absolutely nowhere the next year. And then last year, Collingwood and Brisbane looked to be absolutely nowhere, and now Brisbane has bounced back.
I mean, Brisbane started the season horribly. Bevo, people were calling for Bevo's head.
You know what I think it comes down to? I think it comes down to just the strength all around the league, which we've talked about so much this season. It means that when you're not fully on your game, when you guys are not mentally there, if you're not feeling that competitive drive, like clearly the Swans have not been playing at their full competitive best because they got so far ahead, there's no room for error because all the other teams are right there behind you. You see that any team in the top 4, if they're not at their best, North could easily crack an upset against them. So this is the competition all around the league now, which is, I think, just awesome for the AFL, and it means that anything can happen to anyone.
Well, I'm just thinking about it now, what next season is going to look like, because I can't see any of the teams that are fighting for finals this year having a serious drop-off. You think Adelaide have to get better. You think St Kilda have to get better. North are going to be more competitive. West Coast are going to be more competitive. And then there's Richmond. You think we're going to have a similar season next year, if not better.
Yeah, I can't look at any team here and think of them as a bottom 4 or 5 side apart from Richmond next year.
Yeah.
Well, I guess North and West Coast you probably can.
They're
but
still coming out of their evil, but they're going to be competitive. They're going to win more games.
Yeah, so it's awesome, just the competition we're seeing this year, and we are primed for an epic final 3 rounds. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.